I will now introduce our guest. Rosie Goodwin is the best-selling author of more than 40 novels. She is the first author in the world to be allowed to follow three of Catherine Cookson's trilogies with her own sequels. And she has worked in the social services sector for many years before she then became a full-time novelist. She is now one of the top 50 most borrowed authors in UK libraries and has sold a whopping 4 million copies across her career. Rosie lives with her husband and her beloved dogs in Nuneaton, the setting for many of her books. So welcome, Rosie. So good to be talking to you today.
Aye.
So I just want to say firstly, congratulations on the release of your second book in the Flower Girl series, Our Dear Daisy. How does it feel to have your 43rd book published?
You don't really have time to think much about it because you're always too busy writing the next one.
Yeah,
But it's
right.
great. It's great.
And I know for those of you who are familiar with Rosie's books, you will know that she is a really great writer of historical sagas. For those of you unfamiliar, I might just give you a little bit of a recap of what this Flower Girls series is about. So, the first book was called Our Fair Lily, which you can just see behind me here. And that features on Lily, who is the daughter of a miner working as a parlour maid for the Bellingham estate. It's set in 1875 in Nuneaton, and she gets drawn into their family drama, but she also has aspirations of her own to become an artist, and there's a blossoming class divide romance. And then in the latest book, which has just been released, which is this one up here, we have 20-year-old Daisy Armstrong, who lives with her blacksmith father, Jed, in 1880 Nuneaton. And he gets married to a local widow, Victoria Peake, and that changes everything for the family. It has tragedy and romance and drama. And I personally, Rosie, felt a lot of apprehension. I was really hoping that everything was going to work out for the best for these two characters who really where they have hearts of gold. They wear their hearts on their sleeve, and I just fell in love with them completely. So you've just done an amazing job to immerse me in
Thank
that
you.
world. Now I know these can be read as standalone, they're part of a series, but you had some good news about already Our Dear Daisy, which has only been out for a couple of days.
Well, she's gone. My publisher's got in touch yesterday to say that after 3 days sales, she's gone straight into the charts at number 12. So we
So
had a
fantastic. A lot of
celebratory cup of
plans.
tea.
A lot of fans. I think this is going to be a great read. And obviously, everyone that enjoyed Our Fair Lily was wanting to see the next chapter of what was happening in this town. And those who maybe have not actually read either, these are available on your BorrowBox app, which you get for free through your library membership. So just make
Yeah.
sure that you reserve those copies at the end of this talk. So I just want to flash back then. You had a career in working for social services, and I know that you also fostered a number of children.
Yes, we
How
did.
did that transition to come about to become a full-time writer?
Um, it's difficult to answer that because even before I was published, I've always written for
Mm,
pleasure. And so all our children and foster children really were raised on stories that I wrote for them.
beautiful.
It's something I've always done. Um, so it wasn't really a huge transition. It's just that I made the change from doing it for pleasure to, to becoming published,
Uh-huh.
which I never thought of doing really.
And so I know that there's a story with your husband that
There is.
got you noticed. Can you share a little bit about that story? I think
It's a very weird story. We were fostering a little girl at the time who was the same age as our youngest son. And they were a pair of tearaways, really. And they came in one day with a little cat they'd found. He said, stuck up a tree, and he rescued him. And at the time, as all the mums will appreciate, we got a house full of animals. And so mum put her foot down and said, no, we're not keeping it. But obviously, we were prepared to look after it till we found where it had come from, and we didn't. And so eventually I told them, we'll have to, we'll have to phone the RSPCA and the cat places. No one had room for him, as we thought he was a him. And sadly, um, it looked like if we let him go, he would have to be put to sleep. So of course we kept him,
Mm.
as we thought him. But a few months later, when we took him to be neutered, he came back spayed. So it was a she. And
Right.
she became a very well-loved family member of the family, as all animals do. And then suddenly one day, quite some years later, she went out and didn't come back. And I think what made it worse for us, there was no closure. We never found out
Mm.
what had happened to her. So we were all devastated. And my husband came up with the bright idea of, oh, you'll have to do a little story for the children, which I did. At the time, I think I got three jobs going. I was fostering. I was placement support worker for the Neaton and Bedworth. I was an MVQ level three assessor at the time. So I got three jobs I was juggling, and I think I wrote this little story about 1 o'clock in the morning. And then the next night, I read it out to the children, who were fairly unimpressed with it. But Trev loved it, my husband. And unknown to me, he said, "Oh, I think that should be published." So I came in from work a few days later, and there was the editor of a well-known magazine on the phone saying they'd really love to publish the story. Um, and that they would give me £150 for it. So, of course, he was over the moon, hubby, and then came up with the bright idea. Look, he sorted out lots more stories. So we were getting quite a few short stories and poetry published. And it was him who then actually had the bright idea. Well, I think you ought to write a book. And it all went from there, really,
Well, we have Trevor
because of the
Thanks.
cat. Yeah, yeah.
He could see, yeah, that it was a real passion, obviously, and whether your children were appreciative of that story, it's obviously given you a wonderful life now. So, where do you get your inspiration from for your novels? Is it things that you've read, people that you meet? Where do these
It can
ideas
come from anywhere, from the most weirdest. Sometimes I get a lot of ideas. I do love gardening, although we haven't been able to do much at the minute because it's really horrible over here at the minute.
Okay.
Very autumny and wet and cold. But I do get a lot of ideas when I'm out in the garden, or lying in bed, or they can just come from anywhere, or perhaps people watching. You know, I like when I go to London, I like to tuck away in a corner and people watch, and your ideas can just come from anywhere, really.
I think that really comes across because your characters have really distinct mannerisms. So I can imagine if you were sitting on a train going to London, that you've probably seen someone, but you transport it back in time to a
Yeah,
certain character. I think it's really wonderful how that comes about. So, what does your daily writing process involve? Are you sitting at the desk? Are you recording? Are you typing? Are you writing? What does a typical writing day look for you?
I don't normally hit the office till after lunch
Hmm.
because I'm a fairly tidy sort of person, apart from my office, which is always untidy. Um, I like to get all my jobs done and see to the dogs, and when everything's done, I come in usually after lunch, and I think up until 10,000 words, when you start a new book, you're developing the characters.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I get to about 10,000 words, they're very real people to me. And then you find the story just flows. So I think the more I get into a story, the longer I spend each day in the office
Hmm.
because you need to get it
Are
down.
you do you have a plan before you begin actually typing, or are you flying by the seat of your pants? So here we talk
By
about
the
planning
seat of
or
my
pants.
pants,
Yeah,
really.
right.
I'm not good at, and my publicist, bless them, they don't even ask me now. That I just get a vague idea for a story, and then I'll find that the main character will pop into my head, and then I'll give her a name, and then I'll begin, and then I find it's really weird that after about 10,000 words, the characters take over then, and they almost tell me what they want to do and where they're going to go.
Mm.
So I'm not very good saying, oh, this will happen there and that will happen, because sometimes I find myself writing subplots that I hadn't planned. It's almost as if they were saying, this is what you need to do here. So I just get it down.
I
The
think that
first
really
draft,
comes across because you go on this roller coaster of emotion in your books and you're not sure where it might lead. So I guess
yeah,
that surprise for you is really something that the reader is experiencing as well. You're hoping that, the characters that you fall in love with, be it Lily, be it Daisy, are going to be okay despite, the things they might have to tackle. The other thing I really love about your books is there's a really great sense of time and place. So your books over the span of your career have gone from sort of the 1850s, they've gone right up to World War One. I know the Dilly Story series is in World War One. We've got the 1850s back with the Precious Stone series. In this series now with the Flower Girls, we're sort of 1875, 1880, all set in
yeah.
the Eton where you live. Uh, what is involved in kind of researching a place, but back, over 100 years ago? What sort of is involved in that
Well,
historical
I
research?
think an author has to walk a fairly fine line to me. You want to put enough historical facts in that it's believable,
Mm,
but I think if you put too much in, you can lose the story and the people. So it's sort of a fine line, just enough to set the time and the place,
mm,
but not too much that it becomes more like a documentary and you lose the characters and the
mm.
story. Um, I mean, for instance, with Lily, the inspiration for that one, we're very lucky. Our house has got a wonderful view all the way around it, and we look down over a valley. And the village where I live was actually a mining village back in the era that I write. And so I was looking out the kitchen window one day, and in my mind, I could see a very beautiful manor house, which I don't think there ever was one there. But of course, that's another joy of being a writer.
Make it up.
You can make it up. And then I thought, oh, a little bit upstairs, downstairs, if you like. I love the difference between the classes back then. It was so much more, you know, um, you had the very poor working class and the very rich upper class, and there was such a huge divide.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, we could have, a girl from the pit village working in the manor house, and that's where the idea. And every time I look out of the kitchen window now, I can see Oakley Manor, although it's not really there. But
It's
that's
good to
part
have
of the
your
job.
imagination because those places do feel real. And so I was wondering if Nuneaton now is quite a modern town. So for those of us here in Australia and New Zealand who aren't familiar with where Nuneaton is, it's kind of middle of the UK near Birmingham, from what I understand, maybe near Coventry. So if
Yeah,
people can kind of get
close to
their bearings.
Coventry.
Yeah. So is Nuneaton kind of more an historical town village or is it quite modernized?
It's more modernised now. Sadly, a lot of the older buildings are getting knocked down, which is very sad, I always think. Um, but back in time, it was a small market town. They used to have cattle markets there twice a week. So yeah, there is quite. I don't think I realised quite how much history was attached to Nuneaton until I started to research it when I did write my first book.
Mm.
And yeah, there are some still very nice historic places about.
And obviously, you were saying in Our Fair Lily, you've got that mining aspect as an
Yeah,
occupation for the working class. In Our Dear Daisy, Jed is obviously a blacksmith. So we're looking at real working class here. How
yes.
do you come about understanding life in terms of, like you're saying, the upstairs, downstairs, the working class, the upper class? There's a whole range of jobs that are involved. I mean, there's quite a lot of beautiful descriptions of food and fashion, the milliners. Are you going to a library to research these things? Are there books
Do
that
a
you
lot of
have?
my research online and through books. Yeah,
Mm,
mainly books and online.
mm.
And you can, I mean, it's such a brilliant thing, the internet, isn't it? You can go into anywhere in the world and get street names and areas and have a good look at it without ever having to get on a plane, really.
That's right.
So a lot of it is done on there. Yeah.
And so these two characters, what's interesting with both Lily and Daisy is they've both lost a parent. So
Yes.
we start right at the start, and this is not a spoiler for anyone. We'll make sure we're not going to do spoilers tonight. But Daisy, we know right from the get-go, she has lost her mother 5 years before the book has begun. She's also
Right.
lost her brother, Elfie, who has fallen into a quarry. Lily has lost her father in a mining accident. And I know a number of your other books also deal with orphans. So is this influence from your fostering experience, or is it something that you know was actually quite prevalent in those
I
years?
think it was. I think a bit of both, really. I
Mm,
think back in then, I mean, especially in pit villages, there were some terrible accidents in the pits, and a lot of miners were killed back in those days. Um, and Daisy, to move on to Daisy, I think with her, I it's got a bit to me of a Cinderella feel because Daisy and her dad, without giving too much of the story away,
mm,
are very happily, as happily as they can be after losing mum and brother, happily living together in a small village, Ansley. And then, of course, he falls in love with who he thinks is a very wealthy widow. But obviously, as you know, I like my twists and turns. So she doesn't turn out to be quite what he thought. And once she's living with him when they're married, um, poor Daisy becomes a bit of a Cinderella character, doing everything and looking after stepmom and yeah, so I can't say too much more, can I, for those who haven't read
she's a
it yet?
great character, though. I think you know from the first page when you meet her that she does give that Cinderella stepmother vibe. I was saying that actually to my colleagues when I first started the book. And obviously she has two sons, so these become Daisy's kind of stepbrothers. Gilbert obviously is a bit of a rogue.
Oh,
Um
horrible.
he's a horrible
He's the
character.
baddie.
You peg him really early on, and Daisy pegs him early on as well. Like she's quite firm in trying to keep him at arm's length. How
Yes.
fun is it to write these Ranger characters? Because obviously we fall in love with the main characters. We hear, from their point of view, but then you have this beautiful subtle twist where sometimes we get the perspective of these other minor characters. So like the stepmother Victoria, the son Gilbert. There's beautiful Neve who Daisy meets later in the book in Ireland,
Yeah.
and then the invalid Daniel. How much fun do you have coming up with all of these range of characters of the people going to
Love
come
that. I
across?
love doing it. And I think the biggest joy is when readers will say to you, oh, I hated so and so, the baddie, and I loved so and so, because that tells me, yeah, you've got it right.
Mm.
Because if they can believe that they're real people, then you've done a fair job, I hope. You have to try and make your characters as real as you can so that the readers believe in them, really. But I do love my baddies, and we've got the standing joke in the house that if anything goes wrong or anyone upsets me, somebody's going to bite the dust. It's a joke with my husband, oh dear, which is another thing an author can do, you know.
Course. And you're hoping that the bad characters are going to get their comeuppance by the end. Like that was one of the things driving me to keep,
Yes,
listening and listening, and to decide, gosh, these people need to have some sense of retribution. There needs to be some sense of karma that comes by the end. But I won't
yeah.
spoil it to know whether that happens or not in both those books. Obviously, because you do have these baddies, these villains, and your books obviously deal with a really beautiful romance, often crossing the class divide. It also tackles some darker themes. So in Our Fair Lily, it actually depicts situations of domestic violence, even though it wouldn't have been called that at that time. And
Yes,
we have stalking. And then in Our Dear Daisy, there is again male violence to women and also the home for unmarried mothers. How
yes.
do you come to the desk when you're knowing that you're getting to a darker part of the book and kind of tackling that for yourself? And how do you kind of, I suppose, provide self-care to yourself after you finish writing that passage for the day?
Well, I think perhaps because I do always try, in most cases, to give a happy ending.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember right at the very beginning of my career, a certain editor who took me under her wing and became my mentor. She was so kind. She gave me lots of good tips, and I think you have to put yourself into the position of each character. For instance, my very first agent, when he read the first book to be published, said, "Your baddie's not bad enough." You know, it was quite hard to do things like use really bad language because, as I said to him, "Oh, but my mum's going to read it." And you have to forget that. You
Yeah.
have to think, this is not me saying this or doing this.
Mm.
It's him. So it's not really me doing it when I do these things in the book. It's that character.
Mm.
So I can get away with it and not feel too bad about it.
And it is realistic of the time that women are in a very precarious position, both, financially, if their husbands pass away or if their parents pass
Yes,
away, that they
but
will be left.
particularly in times gone by
Mm,
when there weren't the social help that you can get now, it
mm,
was dire for instance, a widow of a miner back then would perhaps have had a herd of children,
mm.
and a lot of them ended up in the workhouse, sadly,
They are
because there was
working
no
so,
one to support them.
and they're working so hard. Like there's a section in the book where Daisy is sort of, trying to make it on her own.
Yeah,
She's working on that farm. I mean, she doesn't have a break or a day off in 3 weeks, and then she demands that she needs a day off. And it's quite hard physical labor work that she's doing. And then when they're doing the laundry work in the unmarried mother's home with the nuns
yes.
in the convent there in Ireland, it really shows how these women are trying to survive under very difficult conditions.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I remember saying to right at the beginning, one editor in particular, my very first, I think, no, actually, I think it was the second to be published, um, was about a middle-aged lady who lived alone on a small holding and cut her own hair and wore a string belt. And this particular editor said, "Oh no, you we don't want things like that. We want it to be beautiful and young and I said, but I want to write about real people.
Mm.
And I'm not good, I admit. I wish I could. I'm not good at flowery romances, where everyone's perfect. And I do like books. I like them to have twists and turns and a lot going on. So I'm
Well,
not very good at flowery books, I'm afraid.
I think that you have a lot of fans then, like myself, because I felt like I was absolutely gripped to know what was going to happen next. And that sense of not being able to predict what happened is what actually makes it exciting. And of course, you've sold so many books. So there's obviously, millions of fans that are always coming back for the next one. I'm just going to ask another question, but I'm going to open it up to the audience. So please feel free to submit your question that you'd like to ask Rosie for this second half through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I listened to these books as they were recorded. Charlie Sanderson, who's a theatre and film actress, narrates both the books. I was completely blown away. I think she excels in, bringing all the voices to life, a real sense of time and place. And you've given her a bit of a tough job with all the accents that she has to do.
Well, that's another thing an author has to do because even in just in England, if you're in different parts of the country, there are different terms of endearment. There are, different accents, different way of talking. So that's another thing you have to learn as an author to make it realistic, I think.
I love the dialogue between the characters. There's those beautiful scenes where Daisy is talking to Neve in the home, and they really cling to each other. And then the beautiful conversations that she kind of has with Daniel and his father, Liam. I wouldn't say he's really conversant, but he definitely is very gruff. And I think Charlie's narration is really great at bringing the Irish voices to life as well as the ones that are in the
Oh,
home.
she's amazing.
Yeah. And then
She's
obviously in Our
brilliant.
Fair Lily, you gave her the challenge of doing a French accent.
Yes,
Jean Paul's quite a hottie, so I think she does an amazing job with him.
she is. She's amazing.
So I'll just ask, go over to some questions now. So we've got someone's asking, have you ever visited Bliss Hill in Victoria Village in Telford for inspiration? It's a Victorian museum set out like a village with real shops.
No, I haven't, but it sounds something I'd love to
Yeah,
see.
sounds like it'd be a perfect setting.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, maybe one of the future books can feature that little area.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
Lynn is asking, how do you feel about the narrators of all of your books? Do they sound like the characters as you have them in your head? And have you been disappointed in any of the narration? And if so, in what way?
No, I think overall, Charlie Sanderson is very good indeed. And I think she tries to I think she gets to know the characters and
Mm,
how they would talk before she begins it. So overall, I'm very happy with what she does.
mm. Obviously, you were a fan of Catherine Cookson.
Oh,
How
yes.
how did that come about that you were accepted by the estate to write sequels to her trilogies, and what had her work kind of meant to you in leading up to that?
I was very young when I read my first Catherine Cookson book, which was one, excuse me, one mum had read. And of course, I've always read anything in it, anything I can get my hands on. And I remember after reading that first book, I became hooked. I think she was just amazing. In her time, she was a legend. I think she was amazing. Um, so I suppose she was my inspiration, really. And then when I was first published, I'd done a few books, and my editor at the time likened me to Cap Cookson and said, I think you're very like her in as much as your books are very gritty. And then the opportunity came up. The Cookson Trust were looking for someone to do sequels to Catherine's trilogies. Um, And my editor said, I've put your name forward. And it was a bit, oh. And yeah, I was invited to go and have a meeting, which lasted quite a long time. And I never thought for a moment that they would choose me, but they did. And so I did a sequel to Tilly Trotter, another one to the Mallons, and another one to the Hamilton series. It was an absolute honour, but very hard work.
Mm.
Because as any author will tell you, when you write a trilogy, on the third book, you tie all the ends up. So to do a sequel to follow a trilogy, I
Mm.
had to literally unpick all the little threads and move it on again, but I loved it. It was the biggest honour. Yeah, I loved it.
It's
And
beautiful.
after that, my editor said, well, now I think we ought to have a few historical ones of your own because I'd been writing more modern day.
Mhm.
And it all went from there then. They were a success, and that's what I've been doing ever since, really.
And you found your niche then. Were there other historical fiction authors that sort of influenced that shift for you?
Not well, as I say, I've got lots of authors that I like, and I will read anything. I read at least two books a week of other authors. What's happening now is that, which is very nice, I get books forwarded to me from publishers for reviews. So that's nice because I get to read them as well.
Get a freebie.
But I will read anything. I just love reading.
The
Half an hour in the bath every night is mum's time, and everyone knows we don't disturb
Yeah,
mum's half an hour soaking in the bath with a good book,
beautiful. Sounds very relaxing.
which you shouldn't say in front of a librarian, really.
You keep it dry. You keep it dry.
Most times.
Ashley is asking us, are any of your books going to be turned into film or TV series? They are very visual. They really come alive for me.
Well, I think every author dreams of that happening. And I think there's a lot of luck involved there. If some TV company is looking for a certain book at a certain time, you never know. We have had interest now and again. So, but of course, since COVID,
Mm.
I think it's made things not so many things are being televised because, COVID affected everybody. But fingers crossed it might happen one day, you never know.
And there is such an interest in both books and then on the screen. Downtown Abbey in that upstairs, downstairs,
Oh,
Call the Midwife, in terms of unmarried mothers, which our dear Daisy touches on. So I think there's, the appetite is there for having these historical stories brought to life and learning something about what is happening in those times for these
yes.
people and what happens for Daisy.
And again, I think, anyone you talk to, if you get to know them, will have had tragedies in their lives
Mm.
and lost people or so again, it's writing about real people, I think. And I think that's what the public like.
Did you have to do specific research with that unmarried mother's home that you speak of?
Yes, yes. I mean, there has been a lot of publicity, as you know, in papers over I mean, some of the unmarried mums um, have made claims against them many years on, although I think a lot of the people who would have run them back then would be long gone. But
Mm.
yeah, I think it was a known fact that they weren't not all of them, but some of them weren't the safe retreats that you would like to think they were.
Mm. Um,
Very sad places.
um,
And very hard worked while they were in there as well. And some never got to come out, a little bit like the mental asylums as they called them back then.
mm.
Once you went in, sometimes you never came out again, and it could be for something just like postnatal depression or, really frightening to think that this happened.
Or that a male relative is deeming a woman to be hysterical.
Absolutely. If a man had got his sights on a new wife and he had the money and the means to put her away, he could do it,
Mm.
which is really quite scary, isn't it?
Aaron says, thank you so much. You're an inspiration. If you don't mind me asking, how has your education had a positive or negative impact on your writing?
I never stayed on at school. I had the chance to and I didn't. I left school, I got a job, I met my husband. We had a daughter to begin with. I didn't go back to college until I was 30 and did all my teacher training, which is then we were fostering by then. And then I went back as placement support for social services. So, no, I don't really think my education, it was something I loved doing. I was always near top of the class in English at school, but always bottom of the class in maths, I must admit. I never managed to tackle maths, but I always loved English.
I don't think that the stepmother, Violet Peak, also probably topped the class in maths because she seems to have a very big spending habit that is far
Oh,
beyond
yes,
me.
yes, definitely.
We've got another question. Having written so many amazing books, do you ever get writer's block? And if so, how do you get yourself out of it?
Do you know, I've been so lucky. Um, I've only ever had it once, and that was sadly when I lost my mum and dad 9 weeks apart. Um, and yeah, I think I'd just look at the screen and there was nothing there until in the end I thought, that's enough. Um, because it is very therapeutic writing.
Mm.
When you're writing, it doesn't matter what's going on in your life. You have to literally move into that book. Everything else disappears. My husband often brings me a cup of tea and slides it along the desk. And sometimes it goes cold because I'm so into it in there with them that I don't even know he's put it there, bless him. But yeah,
I'm sorry to hear about the passing of your parents. I think that's a really
yeah,
difficult thing. And then trying to use that grief, particularly if you're writing a certain section of the book, like how you then maybe the story goes in another direction that you hadn't anticipated.
but I think again, even things that happen like that to all of us in life does help when you're writing a piece like that in a book
Mm,
because you know how it felt to
mm.
lose someone. Um, so again, it's writing about real people and their feelings, isn't it? That's
It
what I
is.
tried to do.
And that's where we find, like, obviously the loss of, for Daisy with her brother, it was only the two of them. And then she's kind of then left on her own as the only sibling that's able to look after her dad.
Yeah,
And I know Jed talks about that he was hoping that he could pass over the blacksmith, business to his son. And then that, there's no son to
yeah.
pass it on to. And it's quite devastating. And there obviously is a lot of families there that are kind of at the mercy. In our Fair Lily, the mining, as soon as the father's kind of gone, the rest of the family are kind of actually in quite a precarious position.
Yes, yes. I mean, it's only because Daisy had, oh, excuse that. It's only because Daisy had siblings and her own wages to help her mum keep going. Sorry, can you hear the dogs? They're yapping
No, we
away.
can't. No.
Um, yeah, it was very hard for widows back then.
Mm.
And those that had got very young children, as I said earlier, would normally end up in the workhouse because there was no way they could keep the children. It was
Mm.
very sad, really.
I do. You just mentioned your dogs then, and as you know, I am also a massive dog fan,
Yes.
and my dogs are with me while I'm working from home. So I really love that there is a dog featured in each of these books and how they are kind of become part of the family.
Oh,
Sack
yeah.
and then Rags. And of course, I was getting very nervous because when the new step family move in, they're not really a fan of the dogs being inside.
Oh, she was horrible.
Yeah.
Horrible. But again, it's like I said, a bit of a Cinderella-y theme there, really, wasn't there? Where poor Daisy was having to do everything while Victoria sat in her silks and satins and got waited on.
And just wailed and yeah, reclined. And, obviously Gilbert's just off drinking and gambling. He's having a good old time not working
Oh,
for any kind
yes.
of money.
Yeah.
Just got
But
another.
that again shows the difference. I mean, my children are all totally different in natures. So again, it shows that, you know, the siblings from one family can all be so different.
For sure. Because we haven't mentioned that Gilbert's brother, uh, Lewis, is actually a very good person, thankfully,
Yes,
a counterbalance, and has
yes.
trained to be a vet, and then comes to work with Jed in the forge, which is a really
I
nice
really love doing it.
and
Yeah,
he loves
yeah,
doing it, and he loves animals. So you already know that he's, going to be the one that hopefully will have something positive to bring to this family's
yes,
life.
yes,
Uh,
definitely.
we've got another question. You write so beautifully about characters and settings within the UK. Would you ever set one of your books in another country like Australia, where I live?
I have set, I mean, in one of my books, I've been to New Zealand. I've been to Australia. So yes, I mean, as I said earlier, all of my very early books were very locally based, but now, because I have fans in different parts of the world, I do try and, like Daisy, for instance, begins in Nuneaton, but then moves to Hull.
Mm. And it is that,
No, sorry, not Daisy, Violet, the next one.
right.
Yeah, I do move them about.
And so, well, actually, talking, this obviously was going to be designed to be part of a trilogy. Are you able to shed any light with the third book that will come out next year, I would imagine, because you were just talking
Yes, it's
about
out in our Sweet Violet is out in February, and that is actually it started off. The Flower Girls was actually going to be a six-book series, but with each of the stories completely standalone. But halfway through, after I was almost finished Violet, I I got this urge to do something else, which I can't talk about just yet because it hasn't been made common knowledge yet. But I was burning, so I had to have a word to my editor and say, well, look, I've had this idea, what do you think? And she said, oh, yes. She said, right, we'll have three flower girls. And as you know, they're all totally different stories.
Mm,
They just share the names of flowers,
mm.
hence the Flower Girls series. But then there is something very different to come after Violet.
Well,
So
that's good. You always keep us on
watch
our
this
toes
space.
then. We watch this space. Just got another question from Mr. Williams. Have there been any authors in particular who have inspired you, and what would be some favorite books that you've read? Maybe as
Oh,
you're
goodness
a
me.
child growing up.
Well, as I said, Catherine Cookson was always my
Mm,
main inspiration. But I also love Dickens. I love some of the old
I
classics.
am a fan of Dickens.
Um, yeah, I do. But then again, truthfully, I'll read anything if it's well written. I don't stick to one particular genre. I like crime, thriller, all sorts of books. So I'll read anything if it's well written.
Talking of Dickens, actually in your books, there's that idea because he obviously produced them originally as a serial that people would kind of get, the next chapter each week. They were finding out what was going to happen next. And it was kind of always moving at a pace, and the characters being taken on a journey, like David Copperfield or Great Expectations, with a great host of villains and likable characters as well. I think there is that element in your writing, and as you're saying that you like crime thrillers, the Our Dear Daisy does have a really good mystery that kind of feeds through. We hear at the very start of the novel that there has been two young girls that have died who were pregnant. One was murdered and the other one has committed suicide. And that kind of mystery sort of travels throughout the whole book. I thought it was a really interesting sort of thread to follow as you go through.
But I think that's the nice thing with writing is, yes, you're quite right, it did go all the way through. And readers might have thought, well, what was that there for? But then I think for me, the magical number when I'm writing is about 90,000 words. And then you start to tie up all your subplots and things that perhaps you wondered, why was that there? Start to make sense then as you lead up to the end. And that's what I tried to do.
Yeah, I loved how that all tied together and how it kind of actually gets parts get revealed as the story's
Yeah.
kind of progressing. I think that was a really interesting way to do it. You were talking before we came online that you're obviously writing a book and then just as one's getting published, you're kind of working on the proofs of another. Can you just talk to us about that kind of part of your how you're balancing the writing career, I guess?
Well, because I do two books a year, it's very rare you get to write a whole book without having to go back to the one that's coming out next, to do perhaps copy editing or proofreading. I mean, I think a lot of people wouldn't know how many times this is read before it gets to print and by how many different people.
Mm,
And every author has a different way of working. And really, there's not a right and a wrong way. It's what works for you. Like some of my author friends are so clever. They can sit down and tell you what's going to happen in each chapter all the way through and how it's going to end. But that doesn't work for me. As I said earlier, I tend to let my characters take over and go with the flow and just get the first draft down. But then you go back again. Well, I do when I've finished it, um, and start at the beginning because as you're going through, you might think, oh, I could have done that there, or uh, that might be better there.
mm.
So you have a jiggle, and then you're ready to read it, and they will make suggestions. Then the copy editor, and then the proofs. So there's a lot of work involved to get the book actually onto the shelf.
Do you enjoy working with the editors and looking at what their suggestions might be? Is that something that,
I've never ever minded constructive criticism. And of course, you have to always remember that it's your book. And so anything that they suggest is purely that. It's a suggestion. But I'm always happy because sometimes when you're right on top of it, you might not see something that they will.
mm,
You're so involved in it, aren't you? So when I read the suggestions, I will look at it and think, oh, yeah, or oh, no, no, but what I could do is this. So sometimes I might loosely follow what they say, but not in the way they said it, if that makes sense. And, but I've got a marvelous team. I have to say, my team I was in London with them last Wednesday. We had a fabulous day in London. Um, and they're just amazing, all of them. Really supportive and lovely.
I think it's a really good thing about the book industry. For those who work in it, you know what a supportive kind of workplace it can be between the
Oh, yeah.
publishers and the authors and then, booksellers and librarians and obviously us working in digital as well. So it's kind of a huge supportive network when you're
Or
in
you'd
that
be
line.
shocked how many people are actually involved in
Hmm.
the process of just getting one book onto the shelf.
And
Yeah.
even the covers, I have to say, the cover design are really beautiful with this Flower Girl series.
She's excelled, hasn't she? I did tell her that last Wednesday.
Mm.
And each what time one's come out, I've said, oh, well, that's my favourite. But now I've seen the cover for Our Sweet Violet, and that is absolutely stunning.
Your new favorite. Yeah.
Well, they're all so lovely, the Flower Girls
Yeah,
ones,
they
but
are.
we are doing something quite different after that.
Oh,
So,
it's going to be exciting. Look, it's been an absolute joy talking to you, Rosie.
oh, it's been a pleasure to see you.
Just to hear about your writing, hear about your inspiration, to sort of touch on the Our Fair Lily and the Our Dear Daisy. For everyone who's been watching, I just want to thank you for tuning in, and just a reminder that you can get both of these as an e-audio book or an e-book on your BorrowBox app, which you can get free as an app through with your library membership. So make sure that you get into that download as soon as this event is over and you can get into the queue. I want to thank also Beth and Chelsea and everyone at Bonnier who have been really supportive behind the scenes, and my colleague Bridget, who has been doing all the tech work behind. But just most of all to you, Rosie, just thank you for such a delightful, fascinating conversation. I feel like we've had a really good insight into you as a writer in your career, and we look forward to what's going to come next.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Rosie. And good
Thank you.
evening, or good afternoon, or good morning to everyone who is watching us today.